You probably heard that you can write code with the AI, and that sounds totally great for me as a non-programmer, but things are not that easy. So I interview Matt van Itallie today on the topic of how to secure your software against bad AI code. Welcome to another episode of the interview version of the Beginner's Guide to AI, and here we go. Hi, Matt. Welcome to the podcast. And I can I can say a lot about you, but you probably are better at telling things about you and your firm. So who are you and what do you do?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I so enjoyed our initial conversation and really looking forward to today's podcast. Of course, I'm Matt van Itallie. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called SEMA. And what we specialize in is making code understandable to non-technical audiences while also being defensible and precise for technologists. I myself am the son of a math teacher and a computer programmer. So I didn't know it at the time, but I kind of, through my household or genes, was born to treat code as data. And that is exactly what SEMA does. We started with a product that produces kind of like a credit score about a code base and looking at where the code is healthy or not in a way that non-technical executives can understand as well as technical executives. But for the last year, we've had the incredible pleasure of working deeply on a question about AI and code, in particular, helping understand how much generative AI code is inside the code base, how much developers are using generative AI code.
Yeah, the interesting thing is I'm in another project and we have some programmers there and we hired other programmers to evaluate the code. How good is it? And this is kind of familiar for me because is the software not working because the code is bad or just because the topic is too complex? And for an outsider, it's really hard to see. But yeah, the AI topic is really interesting. What's possible there because you read everywhere. You basically don't need programmers in the future anymore because the AI will program or is already programming everything. And yeah, you evaluate if there's a certain level of AI in it. Why is it important for? Is it can't the machine write the code or what's the risk there?
Sure. So I'm going to give a quick analogy that some of your listeners may find helpful when we tell this story, and that is the analogy to open source code. So open source code, as you know, is code written by a community of developers that is accessible and available to developers to incorporate into new code that they are using. You asked a developer in 2024, do you use open source as part of your work? Almost every engineer on earth would say, absolutely yes. Open source helps me avoid repetitive work. I don't have to reinvent the wheel because someone else has figured it out. But if you asked engineering leaders, CTOs, legal counsel, tell us about open source, they would say, it's a great idea, but it comes with risk. It comes with legal risk. It comes with security risk. It comes with compliance risk. And so the state of the art in open source management is it is 100% adopted effectively, but also 100% managed by organizations to make sure that the risks are mitigated. That is exactly the same, except for the adoption rates. Gen AI is not quite at that level between Gen AI coding and open source. Gen AI is also not literally code that the coders wrote. Now, they would have entered it into a prompt instructions, but the code itself did not come from them, just like open source. It's an incredibly good idea to use it. It makes developers more productive, so it's good for the organization. It avoids repetitive work and lets them experiment faster. Your listeners may have seen the Christopher Nolan movie Inception, where these world builders can think of something and it automatically appears. That is like That is like what using Gen AI is. But it also comes with risk. It comes with risk that the code may not be accurate. You've heard of hallucinations about Gen AI when they say things that are not true. The same is true for using Gen AI for coding. Some of the things may not literally not be true. The code may not be maintainable. If it's just written by a computer, no one will understand it, and it's kind of a zombie code base at the end. The code may also have intellectual property risk, and probably the single biggest component of intellectual property risk is that if it's completely written by Gen AI with no context added or no customization to the situation of the organization, the value of that code is substantially less. And so in the technical due diligence process, the buying of companies, they are already beginning to evaluate how much Gen AI there is to make sure that there's still valuable IP. Because the paradox is the faster you can go creating the code, the less valuable it could become unless you still make it very customized to your situation.
Yeah, I remember this thing. There's still a law discussion, but at the moment, it's like if you have something AI generated, there's no copyright on it. So
I cannot stress enough, this is not legal advice. So please, if you're an organization where you get copyright for your software, please go talk to your legal counsel. That said, the United States Copyright Office has said exactly, if there is too much Gen AI, number one, if there's too much Gen AI in your code, it will not get copyright protection. And number two, we, the Copyright Office, are expecting you to be transparent that you are using Gen AI. Now, unfortunately, but understandably, they have not set any quantitative standards yet. It's so early. But we most certainly, if you care about copyright, please have a conversation with your lawyers. SEMA has some free working papers where we can show you the quotes so you can follow up on our blog or contact me and we'll get you the materials. But in effect, we're going to geek out a little bit on copyright. Copyright protection is a protection of the text itself. And if the text itself was written by a computer, indeed, it's not, you don't get it doesn't meet the spirit of copyright protection. So if you care about copyright, you need the text to be yours. By contrast, patent protection is about the idea, and we are very confident that Gen AI can be used while still getting patent protection because the human came up with the idea and then worked with a tool to carry it out. So we're not worried about patent, but we certainly, for the small subset of largely large companies who care about copyright, we definitely think they should get a plan in place with their lawyers for coders using Gen AI.
Yeah, makes sense. No, it's good that we go into that because, I mean, many of the people following the podcast are business people. They are not the programmers, but they might come into a situation where they have to use a software, have to buy a software, or even sell a software. Then it's good, to know that this is a problem. The second problem, you started with this, what if there's hallucinations? What can go wrong? I mean, you have a software, it's AI, you think it's good, then what can go wrong? Do you have an example for that?
Sure. Generative AI has proposed made up libraries and suggested libraries that people to insert into the code. And so a library is an example of open source. It is you would go to a physical library and borrow a book from it. So too libraries are code you can borrow and then put into your system. Gen AI tools have, at least in some cases, made up packages, which is kind of incredible. But of course, we think about examples where Gen AI has made up answers to other questions. It's incredibly powerful. The providers are working very hard, but to solve this, but it's still very much there. The result of putting in a fake package, one scenario could be your product doesn't work. A worse scenario is you're introducing some kind of security risk by referencing something that doesn't exist, or by representing a fictitious package that could therefore open you up to security risk.
And then you come in a situation where I think yesterday or 2 days ago in Germany, there were hours of internet outage. So that might be a case you use for, I don't know, for whatever task you have to do at that moment. You use some software you develop, and yeah, it references a library that's not there, and then boom, nothing works anymore. The old system shuts down or something. I think that's
exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah. That in itself, that would not be risky. Internet down, might be risky, but thinking about health or that could be really, really dangerous. Or cars, like say, self-driving cars, and something does not work.
Exactly, and those are the absolutely the most grave situations of software not working well. Life, health, and safety, of course, is number one. But I bet almost every single member of your audience is working at a tech company or a tech-enabled company and has experienced an outage, and knows how incredibly stressful it is to the business, to the sales team, to the C-suite. Oh goodness, I have gone through those myself, and it is just the worst feeling of something out of your control. And so I'm going to jump ahead. The solution to dealing with potential hallucinations or security risk or IP risk is to make sure there is a human in the loop. And you referenced the beginning. What does this mean for the future of engineers? We're actually really optimistic about how important developers are for the decade ahead. Their number one is still so much more to be digitalized, which is kind of a crazy statement, it may be, but so many processes could still benefit from more automation than exists today. And the folks at Andreessen Horowitz have said we're still at the beginning of the digital transformation, so I can piggyback off of them. But then they're necessary to have a human in the loop to make sure that even the Gen AI generated code is accurate, is safe, is intellectual property protected. That human in the loop will not go away and is frankly increasingly important because of how, left to its own devices, Gen AI could go off in a really bad direction. So if you think about the history of advances in coding, better developer tools like GitHub still require developers. Better developer tools like open source still need developers. Again, just every time you're thinking about how does Gen AI impact things, put in how does open source impact, and ask a developer, do you need to look at the code because it's open source? Because, well, you just got it from open source. They say, are you crazy? It needs to be contextualized. I need to pick the right one. I need to make sure it's appropriate for our situation. Absolutely the same for Gen AI. And we think for absolutely the foreseeable future, developers have an incredibly important role to figure out what to ask, to evaluate the quality of that code, to make it contextualized for their situation, for IP risk and code quality, etc. And so we are very optimistic about what this technology means for developers.
So you then basically have the software engineer like more of the manager of the process, or does it work in that way that, how much AI was my initial question, but that is, and now I see that's not so simple. It's more like one job is taken over by the human, another then by the AI or something like that.
Yeah, and someone, I wish I could give credit, but someone else said this. I think it was Ethan Mollick, actually. If it was a good idea, kudos to him. If not, let's blame me. That Gen AI tools for coders are like tireless interns. Tireless, they'll produce a lot of output. But interns, shout out to interns, I love you, can be inaccurate, enthusiastic but wrong, need a lot of guidance and support, and their work needs to be edited. All but the best interns, their result isn't ready for sharing. And so I like management. You could also say a coach. You could also say a pair programmer. But absolutely, the future of code is more and more and more Gen AI, and it's a conversation between the developer and that Gen AI to produce really excellent results. to make and what we say, actually, I'll go a step further. We talk about the difference between pure Gen AI and blended Gen AI. Pure Gen AI, you type in a prompt, give me code that makes a clock. You take that out, take out that clock code, and you put it into the system without making any modifications. That is pure Gen AI. Blended Gen AI is give me a clock, it produces a clock output, and then you modify it. Well, I don't exactly like this. Well, this one part isn't right. And it's that blended Gen AI, that is the safe code. That is this code that is contextualized, that is secure, that is maintainable. And so the risk from Gen AI primarily comes from too much pure, not too much Gen AI in general, but too much pure. And that's why, of course, knowing how much of your code is pure versus blended and giving developers tools to understand how modified is it or not is so important. We absolutely are bullish. We are so supportive of adopting Gen AI, but developers need the tooling and management needs the big picture overview to make sure that it's blended the right way, that there is that human in the loop, making sure that the code is correct.
This is actually an interesting question, because if you talk nowadays about language generated with AI, it's hard for the machines to realize, is it an AI text? Is it a real text written by a real? It's a written.
Yeah.
We come to points, but is it easier to evaluate if code is AI generated than like talking about texts or so?
The answer is absolutely not. It is incredibly hard. And a huge shout out. So SEMA, of course, is working on this problem. Our detection engine, detecting if it's Gen AI or not Gen AI, was built by researchers from Microsoft Research, from Trinity College Dublin, from some of the world's best researchers. I'm so honored to be working with them. We have had 100 iterations already of this model and finding ways to make it as accurate as possible. It is a very, very hard problem because there's so much complexity to code. There are so many different languages. So when we say language, most models are working in English only or something, whereas there's hundreds of languages, software languages, and at least 50 that are predominant. And so it is not an easy problem at all. And I'm just honored that our team, we've gotten to a commercially reasonable level. It's not 100%, but the error rates are low enough that it's workable for teams.
It sounds like if you have some hints, you also can set humans there looking at the code, and maybe they are better at seeing things. So probably it's also like the first view on the code. I mean, on the website, you have like, what is it, 1 trillion words? Or how I don't know. You searched already through for seeing if it's AI generated. So the problem is, I think, also the amount of code. I work in a small project, and even that was like printed out some thousands of pages. So you want to put a human there and see, did they use some AI somewhere? I think that is really a problem. So the machine helps us also. What you said, it's tireless. This nice quote, I like it because that is really working through a lot of stuff and then hints. And maybe the humans come in as a SWAT, the force that it's then there.
Exactly right. Exactly.
It's also the combination that makes sense. A thing I found interesting with talking to you, it doesn't have to do with the software itself, but with the firm. My agency is totally virtual. I think your firm is also kind of virtual around the world. It's just for how does it work for you? Is it perfect with programmers? Is it? I'm just curious about it.
Absolutely, yeah. We are totally a remote team. We are in about 20 countries and around the sun, effectively, because we have teams in Asia, Europe, and North America, and the Middle East. I recognize that very smart people have decided that being in person makes for better and more effective teams because of the ability to collaborate and innovate in the same room seems to be a magic thing. I absolutely recognize that there are folks who have that strongly held position. At SEMA, we work very hard to overcome that. And what I'd say is, I think it is very possible for extremely powerful teams to work totally distributed, but you have to do extra work to make that possible. You have to be incredibly intentional about the values, which are not just something you put on a wall and pretend you follow, but is the DNA of how the company operates. Because so much of the work will be independent, you need to have a common set of operating instructions, so to speak, like DNA provides. You need to be incredibly anal about how we communicate with each other and what people's preferences are. We have a very long document that details every person, how we communicate and our preferences. And like we say, you can't always be communicated with how you want, but people should know what you prefer so that you know if you're increasing people's energy or decreasing people's energy. For me, people know that I would much rather talk through a document than have me read it asynchronously. Almost nobody else on the team is like that. So we have to make some balances. I will say, I do come down on total in the end in favor of either remote first or blended. I think for two reasons. One is, and I know there are exceptions, but by and large, the work for software engineering is solo work first with a little bit of collaboration rather than the reverse. And I just think of coders as novelists. Would you put a group of novelists in an open office while they're all working on their novels? No way. It requires concentrated thinking work, as little context switching as possible. You need like some basic structure to make sure that they're heading in the right direction and supported, but it's much closer to independent thought work. And that's why you see developers wear headphones when they're coding in an office, because it's just so intense. Anyone who's had to written a long piece, even if you're not a novelist, you know that. So that's reason one. And then reason two, I don't know if this is a policy point or not, but it's unequivocal that a very remote friendly policy, even if there's some in-time office, is absolutely better for parents. And in situations where women are predominantly predominantly responsible for child responsibilities, which should not be so, but frequently is, if you are not making your workplace very friendly to largely remote work, you absolutely are going to lose some of your best colleagues, many of whom happen to be women with families, because you can do excellent work while kids are running around in the background if they're in your home. So for both of those reasons, I know, again, this is a very long answer. I know teams have made decisions about forcing folks back into the office, but I'm a really big advocate of trying to make it work remote first or remote predominantly.
I like that because, like I said, we are much smaller. There's like 4 countries or so, but still, it's like I like to hear about your ideas about it. It's really like interesting, also probably for the people. But I mean, yeah, they're all in business basically, and they probably have all the same topics in their head. So, yeah, I have a last question for you, and this is the. How probable do you think the Terminator scenario is, that the machines take over?
The machines take over, become sentient, and attack us. So very interesting question, and thank you for giving me advance notice to think about this. I am an optimist about technology, and I am an optimist about government regulation. I don't know how many people on Earth are like that, but I am in that category. This Gen AI will be as transformational as the internet, will be as transformational as steam engines. There is no question that it is a fundamentally transformational technology. Probably not like the printing press, but up there on the five most transformational technologies, period. human history suggests we figure out a way to reap the benefits of generative AI while while minimizing, maybe not bring to zero, but minimizing some of the risks. I have confidence that people of good faith and goodwill will figure out the right ways to regulate, right ways to put checks and balances on AI tools. And I think, why is that? I'm an optimistic person. I believe in, I'm an optimistic person, I guess, and I think history has supported it. But I also think we are sufficiently scared of Gen AI that we will put in those tools. And maybe this is a bad analogy, but I think about airplanes. It is now possible to automatically fly airplanes. They are called drones. And I don't mean the drones that humans are controlling. I mean the ones that, totally self-controlling. You could put that in commercial airlines. And it likely would be literally more safe on a miles of flight basis compared to humans. But there is no way on earth that we would let that happen, because the notion of taking humans out of the loop is so freaking scary. It's just in our core. We need to be in control. I actually think it seems pretty clear that self-driving cars on net would actually be safer. But we have made that choice not to do that, at least, at scale, because we want humans we're just fundamentally nervous about this. There was you asked this question, you're going to get the answer. About 100 years ago or so in the United States, there was a book called The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and it was about the terrible working conditions of meat packers, of folks who would cut up cows in Chicago. The author was intending to educate the populace about the poor working conditions for the workers. But what happened is massive food safety laws, because people read the book and were terrified and disgusted about what the food was, what the impact on them was of this low quality food. And there's this amazing quote from the author: "I aimed for their hearts, but hit their stomachs." Namely, like, I wanted them to feel sad and help the workers, but they actually were worried about getting sick. And I think it's a little bit of a stretch of analogy. Given that we are so concerned about this Terminator scenario, and it is a fundamental it's a fear that something's going to be out of our control, that I actually have confidence that that humans will put in the right regulation to make sure it doesn't happen.
That's great. Yeah. I'm an optimist myself, so I love this standpoint, and I think I can totally follow you there. I know that for ages trains could drive by themselves, and then some airports you have it, but people are too afraid to let that really happen at scale. Yeah. So I follow you on that optimistic scenario, and that's, I think, a good thought for the end of the podcast. So thank you, Matt, for being here and explaining how important it is to watch what the AI does, and not to be uncontrolled about it, but use it carefully. And thank you for being here. And I'm curious to see how things develop in that area with software, with programming. Any last words from you?
I had such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much. For your guests, we have written a lot about this on our blog. Feel free to peruse that, or contact me and I'll get you custom. I'll send you articles on this. We've really thankful to our policy team for putting together some white papers and working papers on how to think about all of this.
I will put all interesting resources you sent me in the show notes, so people can then directly download them and see what is possible, what is not possible, and where they have to ask for help. So thank you for being on the podcast, and have a nice day.
Thank you so much. You have a great day as well.